Cedar Grove Cemetery, New Jersey, May 30th, 2019. They're lowering Frank Lucas into the ground. The king is dead. The empire is ashes. But standing at the edge of that grave, clutching a black purse with shaking hands, Juliana Lucas knows something the feds never found, something the streets never touched, something worth $1.4 million buried somewhere in North Carolina dirt. 20 gold bars, 400 ounces each, hidden 44 years ago when the walls were closing in and the throne was burning. Frank Lucas never trusted banks. Banks keep records. Banks talk to the government. Banks are for people who play by rules Frank Lucas rewrote with blood and blue magic. So when the DIA started kicking down doors in 1975, when his own cousins started wearing wires, when the Italians demanded their cut of his 98% pure heroin empire, Frank did what only a true king does. He went invisible. Not to Switzerland, not to the Caymans, to the dirt, to the one place the system couldn't tax, couldn't seize, couldn't touch, the earth itself. But Frank Lucas was no fool. He knew that buried treasure without a map is just expensive dirt. So he created the perfect vault. Not steel, not concrete, silk. He took his wife's wedding dress, the one she wore when they promised till death do us part, and he stitched a code into the hymn. Blue thread on white fabric. A pattern that looked like decoration but was actually coordinates. A love letter written in longitude and latitude. The feds tore apart his Teaneck mansion. They found $584,000 in cash. They found the cars, the guns, the jewelry. They seized everything they could see, weigh, and catalog. They never found the dress. And they never found the gold. Now Frank is gone, the last man who knew where those bars sleep in Carolina soil. But Juliana isn't just a widow. She's the keeper of the final secret. The guardian of the invisible empire, except she's not the only one who knows the treasure exists. Standing 3 rows back, behind the mourners, behind the flowers, behind the fake tears, are men who spent decades in cages because Frank Lucas chose loyalty to the system over loyalty to the streets. Men who believe they are owed. Men who know that legends don't take their fortunes to the grave. They're watching her, waiting. Hunting. The silent man lives, the loud man dies. But what happens to the woman who holds the silence? Hit that subscribe button right now. Because what you're about to witness isn't just a treasure hunt. It's the final chapter of the greatest criminal empire America has ever seen. And the price of digging up a dead king's gold might be higher than the gold itself. Harlem, 1968. Before the empire, before the throne, before Frank Lucas became a name whispered in federal courtrooms and feared in back alleys, there was a classroom. The classroom was Wells' Restaurant on Lenox Avenue. The professor was Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, the most dangerous man in New York who never raised his voice. The student was a hungry kid from North Carolina with nothing in his pockets and everything to prove. Night outside is cold, but inside Wells' Restaurant, the air is thick. Smoke. Gravy, cheap cologne, and loud talk. The kind of place where deals get made over coffee and fried chicken, where kings sit 3 feet from nobodies and the only thing separating them is how they move. At the back table, under the yellow light that never flickers, sits Bumpy Johnson. Knife in his right hand, fork in his left, cutting steak slow like he's got a contract with time itself. Across from him, shoulders straight, suit pressed but not expensive, sits Frank Lucas. He's not a king yet, not a legend. Right now he's just a driver who knows one thing: sit, listen, learn. 3 tables over, a crew of Italian-made men are doing what Italians do when they think they own the place. Laughing too loud, waving their hands, stacking respect like poker chips on the table in plain sight. Gold watches catching the light like advertisements. They want everyone to know they've arrived, that they own this moment, this room, this city. Bumpy doesn't look at them directly. He watches the room instead, then lifts his eyes at the Italians for half a second before returning to his plate. The Italians are loud, he says, calm as discussing the weather. His voice barely rises above a murmur, but Frank catches every syllable like scripture. They wear their money like costumes. They announce their moves like they're starring in their own movie. They think fear equals respect. He cuts another piece of steak, never raising his voice. Doesn't need to. The man's presence fills the room without moving an inch. But let me tell you something about fear, Frank. Bumpy continues, leaning forward slightly. Fear is cheap. Fear is temporary. Fear evaporates the second you show weakness. But respect, real respect, that comes from mystery, from power people feel but can't see. Frank shifts in his chair, absorbing the lesson. He's been running errands, collecting money, watching doors for Bumpy. But his hunger is bigger now. Harlem is dripping cash. The Italians are taking a taste of every dollar that moves through black hands. Then why we keep paying them? Frank asks, controlled anger in his voice. Why Harlem gotta bend the knee? They taxing streets they don't even walk. Bumpy studies him, noting the heat but also the discipline. No outbursts, just focused hunger. Because that's how the game is set up, Bumpy replies. The 5 families sit downtown thinking black folks don't know math. They tax the numbers, the dope, the women. They see us as labor. Workers, never owners. He pauses, wipes his mouth with his napkin. But games can be broken if you understand the rules better than the man who wrote them. Frank's eyes sharpen. So we break it. Bumpy chuckles once, but there's no humor in it. You break it wrong, you end up in a trunk. Break it right, you end up a story they whisper about for 50 years. He taps the table twice with his knife. Listen to me, Frank. Empires don't fall from outside pressure. They fall from inside greed. Always remember that. It ain't the cops that kill you, it's your own people. Your own ego. Your own noise. The words carry weight because Bumpy is dying. Frank can see it in the way he moves slower, more carefully, like a man rationing his remaining energy. The shortness of breath, the way he grips his chest when he thinks nobody's looking. Time is running out for the king of Harlem. The silent man lives, Bumpy says, his voice taking on the weight of final testament. The loud man dies, but when I'm gone, this protection disappears. The Italians will move in like locusts unless someone stops them. Unless someone builds something they can't see coming. At the loud table, one of the Italians slaps a waiter too hard. Money flashes. The whole restaurant notices. Nobody's looking at Bumpy. That's power. They finish their meal. Bumpy pays in cash, exact change, no flourish. Outside, the July heat presses down on Lenox Avenue. They walk slowly, Bumpy's breathing labored. Then, between one step and the next, he stops. His hand goes to his chest. His knees buckle. Frank catches him before he hits the pavement, lowering him gently to the ground. The most dangerous man in New York is dying in a Harlem gutter. Not in a shootout, but quietly, his heart finally giving out. Don't shout, Bumpy whispers, each word costing him. Don't call nobody. Just listen. His grip tightens weakly on Frank's wrist. The throne is empty now. But remember, Frank, kings who announce their coronation get assassinated. Kings who rule from shadows live forever. Then the hand loosens. The eyes fix on nothing. The professor is gone. Frank stands over the body, sirens wailing in the distance. With Bumpy dead, the Italians will view Harlem as their colony and Frank as their employee. He can bow down, accept scraps, and make decent money as middle management in someone else's empire. Safe, predictable, small. Or he can do something nobody has ever attempted. Cut out the middleman entirely. Go to the source. The Italians are middlemen, buying from the French who buy from the Turks. Everyone takes a cut. Everyone dilutes the product. Frank doesn't want a cut. He wants the whole pie. And in 1968, the source isn't in Marseille or Sicily. It's in a burning jungle where American boys are dying by the thousands. Standing over his dead mentor, Frank Lucas makes a decision that will either make him a legend or get him killed. He's going to Vietnam. To the Golden Triangle. To build an empire the Italians never saw coming. Bangkok, 1969. Frank Lucas steps off a military transport into heat that feels like breathing through wet concrete. The air carries diesel fumes, rotting fruit, and something else, opportunity disguised as chaos. Around him, American soldiers shuffle toward helicopters that will carry them into a jungle designed to swallow them whole. Frank moves through the crowd in civilian clothes, invisible among the uniforms. He's not here to fight a war, he's here to win one. Most hustlers look at the street and see a corner. Frank Lucas looks at the world and sees a supply chain that's been broken for decades. Back in Harlem, the Italian families are selling garbage, heroin stepped on so many times it's forgotten what purity means. 10% pure on a good day, cut with quinine, lactose, whatever adds weight and maximizes profit. Junkies shooting poison into their veins and paying premium prices for the privilege of slow suicide. Frank wants pharmaceutical grade, the kind of product that changes the entire game. Because when your heroin is 10 times stronger than the competition, you can charge half the price and still triple your profit. Quality over quantity. Innovation over monopoly. The formula the Italians never understood because they got fat on protection and forgot about revolution. The Golden Triangle sits where Thailand, Laos, and Burma converge, and it's producing the purest heroin on earth. Opium fields stretch across mountainsides like white-flowered graveyards, tended by farmers who've been growing poppies since before America existed. The war created perfect cover, chaos, corruption, American military infrastructure moving massive cargo with minimal oversight. Frank sees the opportunity everyone else is too comfortable or too stupid to recognize. In a warehouse outside Bangkok that smells like motor oil and incense, Frank sits across from Leslie Atkinson, a Chinese businessman with connections deeper than the Mekong River. No translators needed. Money speaks every language. 98% pure, Atkinson says, opening a canvas bag. The powder inside glows white as powdered bone. $4,200 per kilo. But you move volume. 50 kilos minimum. Frank doesn't flinch. The math isn't complicated, it's revolutionary. 1 kilo of Italian garbage sells for $25,000 on New York streets. 1 kilo of this product, properly distributed, generates $50,000. Maybe more. The margins aren't just good, they're astronomical. I'll take 100 kilos, Frank says. But I need delivery the feds can't touch. That's when Frank reveals his genius. Not the product, the distribution. He studied the military operation for weeks, watching how cargo flows from Southeast Asia to American soil. Everything moves through established channels. Weapons. Supplies. Equipment. And bodies. Dead American soldiers coming home in flag-draped coffins. Nobody searches a hero's casket. Nobody questions a fallen soldier's final journey. It's sacred ground, untouchable by law and conscience. The perfect smuggling operation hidden inside America's grief. Frank arranges everything through corrupt military personnel who need money more than morals. The heroin gets sealed into false bottoms built beneath the bodies. The coffins fly home on cargo planes. Frank's people, wearing fake credentials and official paperwork, intercept the cargo before it reaches grieving families. The product gets extracted. The coffins continue their sacred journey, nobody knowing they briefly served a darker purpose. It's blasphemous. It's brilliant. It's completely untouchable. When blue magic hits Harlem streets, it changes everything overnight. The money flows like floodwater. $1 million per day in pure cash. Frank builds his empire using blood, not business. His brothers become lieutenants. His cousins run distribution. The country boys from North Carolina, loyal to Frank and nobody else. They wear overalls and work boots, looking like farmers while counting millions in mechanic shop backrooms. Frank converts the cash flood into something permanent. Gold bars, coins, tangible wealth that can't be frozen by federal order or seized through paperwork. Insurance against the inevitable fall, because Frank learned from Bumpy that all empires collapse. The only question is whether you survive the crash. He lives like a ghost. Modest house in Teaneck. Chevy in the driveway. Off-the-rack suits. The Italians are panicking, their customers disappearing to superior product at lower prices. The corrupt Special Investigations Unit detectives tear Harlem apart looking for the blue magic source, but they can't find what doesn't exist on their radar. Frank follows Bumpy's final lesson perfectly. The silent man lives. The loud man dies. But silence is a cage when you're the king of New York and nobody knows it. The discipline that built the throne starts feeling like prison bars. Success is a drug more addictive than anything in a glassine bag, and Frank's getting hungry for recognition. The invisible man is about to step into the brightest lights in America. March 8, 1971. Madison Square Garden. The night the universe held its breath and Frank Lucas forgot how to exhale quietly, 20,000 people packed into seats that cost more than most families earn in a year. The air thick with cigarette smoke, expensive perfume, and the electric anticipation that comes when legends collide. Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier. The fight of the century. Two undefeated heavyweight champions entering the ring to settle what words cannot. But the most dangerous fight that night wouldn't happen in the ring. It would happen in the seats, where a king decided to announce his coronation. Frank Lucas steps out of a car that costs less than what he's wearing. On his shoulders, a floor-length chinchilla coat, $50,000 of fur soft as sin, white as fresh snow, catching every light in the arena like he's wrapped in captured moonlight. Matching chinchilla hat tilted just so. Juliana on his arm, draped in diamonds that could fund a small revolution. Behind them, the country boys in tailored tuxedos, looking like a Praetorian guard attending a state funeral. They walk down the aisle toward ringside, and the crowd parts like Moses just showed up with a staff and a bad attitude. Better seats than the Italian dons, better seats than the politicians, better seats than Frank Sinatra, who's sitting 3 rows back looking genuinely confused about when the hierarchy shifted in this city. For years, Frank followed Bumpy's gospel like scripture. Stay quiet. Stay modest. Stay breathing. The silent man lives. But silence is a cage when you're generating $1 million per day and nobody knows your name. When you've built an empire that makes the 5 families look like corner boys, but you're still driving a Chevy and wearing department store suits. Success without recognition feels like being the richest man in a cemetery. What's the point if nobody knows you won the game? The coat is a declaration written in fur and arrogance. Not a fashion statement, a manifesto. I am the king of this city. Not the Italians, not the politicians. Me. As Frank takes his seat, the binary opposition of his entire life tips like a scale with a thumb on it. Discipline versus ego. For 3 years, discipline built an untouchable empire. Tonight, ego demands its payment. The invisible man steps into the brightest lights in America, and every camera flash is a nail in his coffin. Across the arena, another type of king holds court. Nicky Barnes, Harlem's peacock. Loud suits, loud laugh, loud everything. The man who poses on magazine covers calling himself Mr. Untouchable like invincibility is a brand you can trademark. Frank despises Barnes for his theatrics, calls him a clown playing dress up in a grown man's game. But tonight, wearing this coat, sitting in these seats, Frank realizes he's competing for the same thing Barnes craves. Status. Recognition. The world knowing what he's built. Their eyes meet across the crowd. No handshake. No greeting. Just a silent duel of empires. Nicky's smile is wide, theatrical. Frank's expression is cool, almost bored. But inside, a truth he won't admit, this moment feels better than any drug he's ever sold. 12 rows back, in a cheap seat he paid for himself, sits Detective Richie Roberts. Honest cop in a corrupt department, which makes him either a saint or an idiot depending on who's asking. While 20,000 people watch two legends destroy each other in the ring, Roberts watches the crowd. Specifically, he watches the man in the chinchilla coat, commanding respect from people who don't respect anyone. Made men nod as Frank passes. Not the dismissive acknowledgement you give to hired help, but the careful recognition you offer someone dangerous. Politicians shake his hand like he's holding their mortgage papers, which he probably is. Roberts watches the body language, the deference, the fear disguised as friendship. He doesn't know Frank's name yet, doesn't know about blue magic or the coffins or the empire built on 98% purity. But Roberts knows power when he sees it, and the man in the chinchilla coat has more power than anyone in this arena realizes. Roberts leans to the colleague beside him. Who's the guy in the chinchilla? The cop shrugs, not looking up from his program. Some Harlem player. Another Nicky Barnes, probably. Roberts shakes his head, studying Frank's table. No. Nicky needs cameras. This guy doesn't. Different animal entirely. The fight explodes around them. Alley dancing, Frazier stalking, the garden erupting with every combination. But while the crowd watches the ring, Roberts watches Frank. Watches who walks up to him between rounds, who leans over his shoulder, who pretends not to stare too long. A map of power is being drawn in front of him, and at the center of that map sits a man in a $50,000 coat. After 15 brutal rounds, after Frazier wins by decision, after the crowd files out arguing about scorecards and reliving combinations, Roberts goes back to his office and starts building a file. No name yet, just a description and a question mark. He follows money trails that lead nowhere. Maps connections that dissolve into smoke. Frank's organization is airtight, family-run, loyal to blood and fear in equal measure. But the coat was a crack in the armor. The first mistake. The moment the invisible man stepped into the spotlight and forgot that spotlights cast shadows, and shadows attract hunters. The Italian families notice too. In a social club on Mulberry Street, the Genovese crew holds an emergency meeting. They've been hemorrhaging money for 2 years, their heroin customers vanishing to a superior product they can't identify or stop. Now they have a face, a name whispered in the right ears. Frank Lucas. Some nobody from North Carolina who thinks he can operate in their city without paying tribute. The capo taps ash into a crystal tray and speaks the words that will echo through the underworld. Find out who this guy is. If he's the one bleeding our business, we send a message. Nobody disrespects this family. Nobody. Frank's empire reaches its absolute peak in the weeks following the fight. 80% of Harlem's heroin trade flows through his hands. Millions per week converted to gold bars, property, politicians on payroll. He's untouchable by every metric that matters: money, power, protection, fear. But the chinchilla coat painted a target on his back that will never fade, no matter how many judges he owns or how many cops look the other way. The net closes from two directions simultaneously. Richie Roberts building a legitimate federal case, following the law because he still believes the law means something, and corrupt Special Investigations Unit detectives demanding their cut because in their world, nobody makes money in New York without paying the tax. Frank stands at the summit of his mountain looking down at the world he conquered. But he doesn't see the avalanche starting beneath his feet, doesn't hear the ice cracking. All he hears is the roar of applause and the sound of his own legend growing. The silent man lives. The loud man dies. And Frank Lucas just screamed his name to the entire world. January 26, 1975. 48 hours before impact. The sky over Teaneck is the color of a bruised dark purple, bleeding into angry gray. Snow clings to suburban roofs like a death shroud, and inside the mansion at the end of the cul-de-sac, Frank Lucas sits watching his empire bleed out through 1,000 cuts he cannot cauterize. The phone rings every hour with bad news wrapped in familiar voices. His cousin got picked up in the Bronx, already talking before the cuffs clicked shut. A driver flipped in Newark, traded 3 stash houses for years, shaved off a sentence he hasn't even received yet. Street dealers cutting deals like they're trading baseball cards, offering up names, addresses, dates, anything to avoid the cage that's coming for everyone who touched blue magic. Loyalty versus survival. The binary opposition that destroys every empire eventually. Stay loyal and die in prison, watching your family starve while you rot behind concrete and steel, or betray everyone, live as a marked man, and spend whatever freedom you buy looking over your shoulder until a bullet finds the back of your head in some forgotten parking lot. Frank doesn't blame them. Fear makes rats of everyone eventually. The organization he built on blood and North Carolina kinship is hemorrhaging informants like a severed artery, and no amount of money or threats can stop the bleeding now. Richie Roberts has been building his case for 4 years, patient and methodical, following money trails Frank thought were invisible, mapping connections, turning small fish into witnesses against bigger fish until the entire food chain leads to one name. In the basement, away from prying eyes and potential bugs, Frank opens a heavy canvas bag. Inside sits the dull, unforgiving glow of gold. 20 bars, 400 ounces each, $70,000 per bar in 1975 money. $1.4 million in future dollars, if the future ever comes. This isn't just money. It's the last piece of the king's soul that the government cannot touch, cannot seize, cannot catalog and auction. Frank works quickly, hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding his veins. He doesn't trust banks. Banks keep records. Banks have managers who talk to feds when pressure comes down. The earth keeps secrets better than any vault ever built. He loads the gold into a trunk, destined for the red clay of North Carolina, near the childhood home where he learned that hunger was a feeling you never truly forget. The drive south happens in darkness and silence. No entourage, no convoy. Just Frank and the weight in his trunk, and the road stretching toward a past that feels like another man's life. Near his childhood home, in a field that looks like every other field, under a sky so dark The stars feel close enough to touch. Frank digs. 4 feet down. Deep enough that metal detectors won't ping. Shallow enough that he can retrieve it if he survives what's coming. But gold without a map is just expensive dirt buried in anonymous earth. Frank needs a way to remember, a way to tell Juliana without speaking words that could be recorded, transcribed, used as evidence in some future courtroom. Back in Teaneck, with dawn approaching and time running out like sand through an hourglass, Frank takes Juliana's wedding dress from the closet, the one she wore when they promised forever, back when forever seemed possible. White silk and delicate lace, a symbol of something pure in a life built on poison and power. He sits at the kitchen table with blue thread and a steady hand, stitching coordinates into the hymn. To anyone else, it looks like decorative embroidery, flowers and vines and patterns that mean nothing. But Frank knows every stitch is a number, every loop a direction. Latitude and longitude written in the language of a seamstress, a love letter encoded in geometry. He stitches the location of his buried fortune into the fabric of their marriage, binding his legacy to the only person left he thinks he can trust. January 28, 1975. 6 in the morning. The front door doesn't open, it explodes. DIA agents flood the mansion like a black tide, faces covered, weapons drawn, moving with the precision of men who've rehearsed this moment in their sleep. They find cash. $584,000 hidden in walls and floorboards. They seize cars, jewelry, weapons, everything they can weigh and catalog. But they walk right past the closet where the wedding dress hangs. Just another piece of clothing. Just fabric and memories. Nothing worth a second glance. In the interrogation room, the offer tastes like poison disguised as salvation. 70 years in federal prison if he stays silent. Cooperation if he betrays everyone he's ever worked with. The binary opposition crystallizes into a single, impossible choice. Frank thinks about the gold sleeping in Carolina dirt, about the blue thread in the wedding dress, about Bumpy's final lesson and the cost of being a legend. The silent man lives. But in this room, silence is a suicide note written in concrete and time. The king becomes the canary. That's how empires truly die, not with bullets or raids, but with signatures on plea agreements and testimony that burns down everything you built with your own words. Frank Lucas sits in windowless rooms for months, talking until his throat is raw and his soul feels lighter and heavier simultaneously. He becomes the most valuable informant in DIA history, a weapon aimed at the heart of the criminal world that created him. His testimony dismantles the French connection like a controlled demolition. Italian capos who ruled neighborhoods for generations find themselves in federal custody because the man they underestimated decided survival meant burning the entire house down. The corrupt Special Investigations Unit gets peeled back like rotten wallpaper, exposing the mold beneath. Dirty cops who built beach houses on drug money suddenly face the same cages they helped fill. Over 50 convictions flow directly from Frank's cooperation, each one a betrayal written in legal testimony and recorded confessions. He gives the government everything: names, dates, amounts, methods. The silent man finally speaks, and his words destroy more than bullets ever could. But cooperation isn't salvation. It's just a different kind of damnation. The binary opposition shifts violently from loyalty versus survival to redemption versus damnation. Frank serves 15 years instead of 70, walking out of prison in 1991, technically free but spiritually imprisoned by a label that follows him like a shadow with teeth: rat, snitch. The man who broke the code in the underworld, cooperation with authorities, is the unforgivable sin, worse than murder, worse than theft, worse than anything except the one thing Frank became. He returns to Harlem as a ghost, haunting his former kingdom. The streets that once parted for him now turn their backs. Old associates cross the street rather than acknowledge his presence. Young hustlers who never knew him recognize his name only as a cautionary tale, the king who chose survival over honor. The word rat follows him everywhere, whispered in bodegas, shouted from corners, graffitied on walls near places he used to own. Frank tries reinvention, becomes a motivational speaker warning kids about the cost of the life he lived. The irony suffocates. The man who poisoned a generation now preaching salvation. Some see redemption in his efforts. Most see a con man working a new angle, selling morality like he once sold blue magic. Always hustling, always performing, always trying to rebuild respect from the ashes of betrayal. Through all the years, through testimony and prison time and hatred that follows him like cologne, one secret remains buried. The gold in North Carolina soil. 20 bars sleeping 4 feet down, untouched by time, growing in value as decades pass, and inflation transforms his buried fortune into something worth dying for. Frank never tells anyone. Not lawyers negotiating deals, not federal agents offering immunity for full disclosure. Not family members desperate for money when the empire's ashes yield nothing but debt and disappointment. The secret dies with him on May 30th, 2019. Heart failure in a New Jersey nursing home. Morphine dripping into veins that once carried the hunger of 10 men. His last words to Juliana sound like delirium, but carry the weight of final instructions. The dress knows. Blue thread tells the truth. Carolina dirt keeps what banks cannot hold. Then silence. The kind that lasts forever. 3 months after the funeral, Juliana stands in a Carolina field, wind cutting through her coat, the sky heavy with unshed rain. The wedding dress is spread on the ground like a blueprint for excavating memory. She's decoded the pattern, coordinates stitched in blue thread, latitude and longitude disguised as flowers and vines. Frank gave her a treasure map sewn into the fabric of their marriage. 4 feet down, her shovel hits metal. The sound is dull, final, undeniable. She clears earth away until the first gold bar emerges, gleaming even under mud, solid and indifferent to everything it cost. $1.4 million in current value. The last piece of Frank Lucas that the government never found, never seized, never cataloged. But this gold isn't clean. It's crystallized addiction, death, and power. Every ounce carries ghosts. Junkies who overdosed on blue magic, families broken, children raised on corners instead of kitchens. Taking it means inheriting that blood. Spending it means laundering history through time. Frank's real legacy isn't the heroin empire or the cooperation with authorities. It's this question he left buried for someone he loved. Does love justify leaving someone you care about with both a fortune and a curse wrapped in the same package? Juliana stands over the open grave she's dug for history, shovel in hand, gold at her feet, wedding dress spread like evidence of crimes that have no statute of limitations. If you found that dress, decoded those coordinates, stood in that field with a shovel and a choice, what would you choose? The treasure that comes with enemies who never forget, or the peace that comes from leaving dead kings buried with their secrets? Some questions have no right answers, only expensive ones.